I feel ran well.
Did you bring me an apple? What am I gonna? I'm gonna starve to death.
I know. Oh, she bought a snack. She bought a waffles, an apple. She bought it.
What's your name?
Addie.
Addie? What a nice name. Where'd you get that name?
She don't know.
You don't know. How to widen the curve. this house is so strong.
Sit still.
What's new, my girl?
All right, good morning, everybody.
How's the dogs?
See some familiar faces.
How's
Thank
baby
you for
brother?
coming again. Today, we're going to look at housing here at, I think, housing 9 o'clock, economic development 11 o'clock. And so Aaron Arnett is here to conduct this part of the process. And Aaron, as you mentioned, I think housing might not go for an hour and a half. It's kind of a shorter conversation. But Aaron's been doing a lot of research, and this is going to be specifically about Beech Mountain. So everybody here's Aaron Arnett.
Hey everyone, and like David says, we've done a lot of market research specifically for the community. We're going to continue to be doing that over the course of this project to really figure out, as mentioned yesterday, we really need to understand what makes sense for us from a market standpoint here in Beech Mountain, and hopefully this data will start to tell that story. Again, this won't answer all the questions. In fact, that's not, this meeting, this trip that we're here this time, this first charrette, is really more for us to listen, but we do have this data that's giving us a baseline to understand what those market opportunities are. Because when we talk about the commercial district, which is our key focus area, we need to understand what there's an opportunity for here, what the market will bear. And so these next two meetings, this one at 9 and the one at 11, as David mentioned, they kind of, it's a paired meeting, so one really connects to the other. For this particular meeting, we're going to talk about housing, and I've got about 4 slides, not a whole lot of information, just to share with you some of the high notes of what we've learned so far about the overall housing economy here. And we're going to share with you some things that we've heard from the public as well, from a broader standpoint. That'll be the first part of this meeting, and then after that, I'm gonna close the presentation, and we just want to have an open conversation with you all like we did the last couple of meetings yesterday. So,
I'm gonna follow you just for about another 15 minutes about missing middle housing. So,
okay.
yeah, so that'll be, then we can have a discussion.
All right, well, here we go. Just a few slides here. So we're going to start, I know that's a little bit blurry, I think. My eyesight is so bad, I sit there and I correct it, and it's still blurry. Yeah, it might be good.
Whitney, should you turn?
So this isn't specifically housing, but obviously, our demographics are a reason for the housing that we have and the opportunities that we have there. So this is very important for the economic discussion later, but also for the housing discussion. And I guess the first thing just to share with you all is that you're a small community. We all know that. We talked a lot about that yesterday in terms of who we happen to be and what our population is. The most current estimate for population in Beech Mountain proper is 681 people, and that's from North Carolina State Demographer. They update these numbers every single year, and that's where we are. That's the size of our community right now. We're probably a little bit bigger than that 2 years later, probably pushing 700, maybe a little bit more, but that's the most accurate number that we have here to share with you all. And you can see upper right chart that after you all were incorporated in the 80s, you kind of grew sort of slowly until 2010, and there was a big jump between 2010 and 2020, and we've kind of leveled off a little bit there since then. The median age is just under 58, and that's a little bit older. That's a good bit older than what we typically see in our communities for median age. And, you know, I think all of these numbers are just gonna, you're gonna nod and say, well, of course, this makes sense. We know that you all are a retirement community. We know that there's a lot of second homes here, but in terms of the full-time residents, you know, we're about 57, 58 in age. Household size, that's another thing that we see quite a bit in a retirement type community, is 1.94. The state's probably 2.3 or something, and don't quote me on that, but you know, you're a little bit smaller in terms of housing size. That makes a lot of sense as well. When we look at some other indicators, which again connect directly to the housing market as well as the commercial and economic market, your median household income here is just over $90,000 a year for the people that live here in the community. And if you look at this chart right here, you don't need to be able to read it. The only thing you need to be able to see is that you all have the highest median household income in the entire region. And I looked at a 4 or 5 county region, I looked at all the zip codes, I looked at all of the communities and counties within that area. You all have the highest incomes in the area. One of the things you'll see, I'm only gonna say this once because it's more relevant to the next. Whenever you see green, that's the town of Beech Mountain. Whenever you see orange, that's your primary trade area. In one of the meetings yesterday, I mentioned that we need to make sure we keep in mind that our businesses, the demand for housing, what generates that demand for business and housing does not stop at our boundary of the town limits. Our businesses serve a population that's larger than that. I will go into this in the next meeting, but we have defined what that primary trade area happens to be. So it's important when we see that our main zip code is projected to grow faster than anywhere in the region over the next 5 years. Our main town limits is has higher income than the larger region. But you can also see our primary trade area, our bread and butter market, is also in the upper end of both of those. Both of those are really positive economic indicators for the growth of a community.
Excuse me one second. When you say our region,
Uh-huh.
and you're going by zip code only, or are you
No,
going by
ma'am.
the town of Beech?
I'm sorry, I may have not said that. I looked at towns, Banner Elk, Blowing Rock, Boone, everywhere else. I looked at your zip codes. I looked at the counties that make up this larger region, and every one of those bars represents all those. So the answer to that question is no. We looked at everything.
The zip code goes all the way Valley Cruces, we're
Correct.
very far away, right?
Absolutely.
Great.
The zip code covers, it covers Beech Mountain and Banner Elk, so we know that. And that's why we look at it in different slivers, because,
Thank you.
you know, the data tells a story, and we can't look at the town by itself. And we can't understand what the opportunity is looking at that one small geography of just 681 people. We have to look at it in context with that larger region.
How do you determine that trade rate?
I'll stay tuned to 11 o'clock and I'll let you know, because it's more relevant to that discussion, so.
And you've got Tennessee in there too, it looks like.
Yes, yes, because that's part of your region as well. So anyway, I think that's all I wanted to show on this slide. So now we're gonna, that's just kind of highlighting some of the demographics, and now we'll go into housing slides, and that's really what we're talking about here today. And I know there's a lot of numbers on here, so just bear with me about this. Much like median household income, when we look at housing values, and this is occupied housing, okay? Your median home value of occupied housing is $463,000. And you can see with that second chart with the bars, you can see that green bar, you all are at the upper end of the region in terms of home values. Again, another really good indicator. Now, it's interesting, if we look at Zillow and we look at other data like MLS data and all of that, we can track how that's changed. Between 20 and 25, the home value changes have gone up 111%. That's a massive amount of increase. Now, in the last year, so between 24 and 25, it's leveled off significantly. So you've actually, let's just all say it's stayed pretty much the same over the last year. Now, it doesn't matter where we're working, if we're working in an urban place, if we're working in a rural place, if we're working in a destination community like you all happen to be here, these trends we're seeing, this art, or this, this bar we're seeing everywhere, where since 2020, housing costs, housing values, which of course translates to cost, housing values have just shot through the roof. But they're also leveling out over the last couple of years. So this is something that we see quite often everywhere we work, but that's not necessarily something we see. 111% growth over a 5-year period. Now, we talk about there being, I'm just gonna stand up. I gotta talk with my hands. And point. So we talk a lot about, well, we've got so many homes here, but yet we've only got 681 population in this community. 77.4% of your housing stock, this is a census number, by the way, is second home or seasonal. We've worked in a lot of destination communities, a lot of resort communities, and I don't typically see that number being that high. It's higher here than I've seen it. And in fact, we were talking to folks with the town the other day about some other topic, and this came up, and they said, well, the census number is probably a little bit low. It might be pushing more 80% here. So that's important for us to understand. We've got a huge housing stock that we have here right now, and 80% of that is seasonal, short-term rental, second homes, and for the most part vacant at certain times of the year. So that's important for us to understand. Now, when we talk about the full-time homeowners that are here, the people that live here year-round, 83% of those homes are occupied by homeowners. And then 17% are renters. Now that could be, y'all got a lot of condos, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. That might be part of it. There might be a lot of rental that's happening in those housing types for full-time residents. But people are renting houses too. That does happen. I didn't think that I would see with occupied housing quite as many rentals. But as I really learned more about the community, that number makes a lot of sense to me too. The fact that 17% of your occupied housing year-round is rental. Now, when the next thing that we look at is affordability and attainability, and we'll probably talk a lot about that. I know that Tom will when we talk about missing middle housing, but we like to try to define that. And what we see is that for your home owners, 26%, so just about a quarter of the homeowners, year-round residents of this community, are considered to be cost burden. And what that means is they're spending 30% of their monthly or annual income on housing costs. So mortgage plus utilities, rent plus utilities. That number I see quite often in many communities. It's not an indicator of affluence or wealth. We can work in wealthy communities and that number's a lot higher. So this is not something that I'm concerned about, but I just wanted to share it with you because that's an indicator we often look at. We usually do it for rental housing as well, but unfortunately there's just not enough data here to get an accurate account of that. So I'll look into that to see if I can dig in more to the affordability of rental, because usually you'll see that number's a little bit higher than when we talk about homeowners. So I don't want to dwell on that. So let's talk about the housing types, because I know that I want to have a conversation with you all about that a little bit later. 80% of your housing stock is, and again this is occupied housing, year-round residence, is single-family detached. 18% is either multifamily or single-family attached, and basically that's our condos that we have all throughout the community. So about 20% of your housing kind of falls into that category. And yeah, I don't think that this and that really are indicators of each other, tenure and housing types. But again, my gut tells me that there might be a little bit more rentals that are happening in the condo areas than there are in the home areas. And I may be wrong about that. That's just a hunch. So finally, on this slide, we're looking at sort of the cost of the market, so to speak, and values. These are sort of real-time numbers of what's happening right now, what's for sale here in the region. And I'll first talk about the single-family homes. So that includes condos for sale, that includes homes for sale. You'll have to excuse this number because I messed up with my font size. But your condos that you have here in the community, there are about 54 condos that are on the market for sale right now in the town of Beech Mountain. And they range from $117,000 upwards of $535,000. I'll be honest with you, most of those are shifted to, probably 200, 300 and up, maybe 300 and up. The 117 is a bit of an outlier. It's a small property. It's 300 square foot in one of our condo developments, so it's more like a studio type of a deal. When we look at housing that's for sale, it certainly tracks more along the lines of what we see with the median housing. Right now, there are 63 homes currently for sale. And this doesn't matter if they're owner occupied year round or if they're seasonal. These are just for sale products. The lowest is about $380,000 and the highest is $2.2 million. Is that your house? Yeah, that's the highest that's on the market for right now, but a wide range, but upper end. Point is upper end. When we look back at median values, we look at our median income, more affluent, higher housing costs. Now, this number here talks about regional apartment rents. There aren't any real apartments here in this community. Yes, there are condos that are privately owned that are leased out, but there's no apartment complexes. If we look, really, the closest apartment complexes to you all are down in Banner Elk, and then there's others around. There's some in Newland, some certainly in Blowing Rock, and then a lot in Boone as well. But if we look really at the immediate area, we're looking at rents about $1,600 a month and up. So just there's no real conclusion to that other than to say that's really what we're seeing.
What's the average bedroom on that?
Pardon?
Average size?
Don't know the answer to that question, so I can see if I can dig into that a little bit, but and I know I can, by the way. I just didn't pull that. All right, so the last slide here is one of the big things that's really a huge part of our housing market, and that's short-term rental. And I'm going to hit on, well, I'm probably hit on everything here. You all exist in the, it's just like your zip code, 28604. You exist in the Banner Elk submarket. That's what they call this area. The vast majority of that submarket listings, short-term rental listings, are in Beech Mountain, okay? There's 3,013 listings in our submarket. Again, most of those are going to be in Beech Mountain. That's a lot. I have seen places that have more than that in rural communities. There's one community in Oklahoma that's a destination community. We've seen more of that, but that's a lot. That one, and I'm talking about in Oklahoma, is an outlier compared to that. So this is a lot of listings that you have here. Now, if we look at all of those listings, the average annual revenue for those properties is about $44,500 per year. That's a pretty significant chunk of change there. And that shows, obviously, that there's an investment market. Obviously, one of the reasons why we have 3,000 listings is A, because we're a cool place and people want to be here, whether they want to live here or whether they want to visit here. And then B, it's something where it's a good investment here in the community. We certainly see that with that average number. Now, our occupancy rate is 45%. It's not particularly high, But we see numbers like that in virtually every seasonal place that we work, whether it's mountains, whether it's, you know, rural destination with lots of outdoor recreation, whether it's a beach community. We see those numbers like that. Now, I mentioned the average. Within Beech Mountain proper itself, the highest performer last year made $163,000 in revenue on that particular property. Now, there's some that made just a couple $1,000s, and that's probably because they only listed for maybe a couple of weekends. Maybe they were just doing Martin Luther King weekend, which is a big ski weekend. We know that. But anyway, that was the highest performer. Now, this is an interesting number to me. We get all this data from AirDNA, which is, you know, it collects data from all the different short-term rental agencies that are out there, Airbnb, Vrbo, etc. And it provides all of this data based on that. But it also ranks these different communities and gives them a score. And the score is really based on occupancy rate, it's based on investability, it's based on rental demand, and it's based on revenue growth and regulation, and seasonality. You all, as you might imagine, perform really high on seasonality, but your overall score isn't that great. It's 47 out of 100. And when I looked at that, one of the big things was revenue growth. And honestly, I was mentioning this to somebody the other day. I think that there's been a slight decline year over year in revenue growth, and that's the reason why that number's low. This next year, if there's more revenue growth, that number's probably going to shoot up. So take that with a grain of salt. I think when we look at this number, 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 average daily rate, $317 a night. All that indicates that, yeah, this is a strong market for short-term rentals. But again, we know when we go back, we have however many number of housing units here, but there's only 681 year-round population here in this community. So that's all I had to share. I know that Whitney had a couple of slides to share, or we could wait until later.
Yeah, we'll wait till after. I'll segue in for your economic stuff.
All right, that's cool. Yes, sir.
This slide, the 3,000 listings, that is Beech Mountain property.
No. Good question. That's pretty much the zip code, but the vast majority of those are in Beech Mountain. So there's some in Banner Elk, there's some in the outlying areas of the zip code, but most of them.
Banner Elk, would that include like Elk River?
Pardon?
When you say Banner Elk, would that include Elk River, for instance?
Is that in the zip code?
Yes, sir.
Then yes, sir, it does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it does include those areas, but again, it's like I mentioned before, the market isn't defined by the town limits. You know, someone may rent something down here in Banner Elk for the snow weekend, and they're not going to Sugar, they're coming up here. So they're important to our market. So, but you can see just from that scatter plot, most of them are in the Beech Mountain area.
The 163,000, is that strictly Beech Mountain, or is that the zip code?
That one is one singular property in Beech Mountain. That one is the entire area.
Okay, that was something
The
like
average is the entire area. This one, I just kind of zoomed into our area, and I figured out which
area,
one.
163 could be Elk River, like you just said.
No, that is in the town
That
limits
is in the
of
town limits?
Beech Mountain.
Okay.
And I don't wanna, I mean, y'all can go on the Airbnb or Vrbo and figure it out. But it might be this property right here. If y'all recognize that property, it's actually near a commercial district down in that side of the town. But yes, that is in the town limits. It might be in Avery County, but it's in the town limits.
I know you said that you didn't have the data on I think like the long-term rental, or like the, ratio to their household income, but I think anecdotally what we hear is that like staff housing is, like worker housing is a problem. Does that show up in this data at all, or is there any like?
It doesn't, it's not showing up in the data that I'm showing so far. That's one of those deeper dives that we need to do, and part of that is having this conversation that we'll have after Tom finishes talking about missing middle, because that really relates to missing middle. But yes, that's a thing, and there's two pieces to that puzzle, I think, just to kind of think about before we get in the conversation. There is the seasonal staff. I see that the resort has a property that they have for seasonal staff. That's a big piece of it. But there's also more affordable or attainable housing that we want to have for year-round people as well.
Yeah.
So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom for your comments on and thoughts on missing middle.
Any more questions about? Plug in. Jonah, he came and went.
He went into the kitchen.
Tom, can I? Aaron?
Yeah, really. I did have one question. Are you able to segment the data on income by age group?
Yes, I can do that. I haven't, but I can.
What was his question?
Can we look at the income numbers and separate them by age group? I can absolutely do that, and I will.
Yeah, because I think that gets to what Kay was asking. You know, if you pull out the retired folks, they probably have a higher income versus.
Of course, yeah. I'll make a note of that, and we'll dig into that.
Don't worry about that.
One over here, and then we'll right to you. Yes, sir.
Our room tax collections give you a more accurate number of the number in this town, because it's probably like 800 or 900. And the median values, the report from the town manager of Rock, theirs is like 750,000. So way ahead of our town, and we know that the resorts around us are way ahead of us too. Ridges, Elk River.
Yeah. We're talking to Armando about getting some of that additional data. I've heard 900 to 1,000 or so, but it fluctuates too. So, over the course of a year, you know, some are listed all year long because people don't live in them at all. Some of them are just listed maybe just over, you know, between December and March. So yeah, it definitely fluctuates, but that's a good point, and we'll get more data for that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have a question, that short-term, 44,000 median, income.
Median annual revenue, yes, ma'am.
And having dealt in short-term sales, actually COVID made a big difference. So you're looking at, an influx that really exploded here during COVID.
Yep.
Okay? And from COVID, you're also looking at an influx of purchasing and building.
Yep.
Okay? Most of mine that were in the short-term sales make much more than 44,000. And I mean, that's two-bedroom enough.
And again, that's an average number.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, some folks, you may be dealing with people that are listing it longer and maybe they're higher-end properties, as opposed to some folks may have a home that was built in the 70s. It's a small cabin that they had here that they list just for, again, a few weekends a year.
My homes were very eclectic.
Oh, I'm sure your homes are. I'm talking about all homes in the community. So that number, 44,000 is the median. There's many that make a lot more money than that in the area. You're dealing with those.
And then you'll see an increase since COVID that will increase that, amount because they're renting more than coming up. Where in COVID, they were coming up more often as users of their own homes and then renting out. Now they're coming to an economic, state where they're needing more income to facilitate that short-term rental.
And that's a good observation. I appreciate you sharing that with me, because that might be one of the reasons why that market score was a little lower than what we see, what I would have expected. But that's a great observation. Right.
And hurricanes, exactly. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, hey, good morning, everyone. I'm back. I'm gonna start this off and kind of a framing the housing related to the types of walkable communities that we've been doing for quite a while. the hardest part, obviously, and this is what, Bob said, is like, I don't want it to, the master plans, do beautiful master plans, and then they go sit on the shelf and never get implemented. Implementation is like really, with anything, and when you're a developer or a builder or a town, it's really difficult. It's very complicated. There are thousands of little decisions you have to make along the way to make these successful. And the most successful communities that we've worked on are a combination of usually two things. One is great streets, like the kind that Rick Hall talked about, and also with a great plan, including the public realm being very inviting, and also really good architecture. And I don't mean expensive architecture. I just mean architecture that it's nice aesthetically. There are all sorts of different styles, and we talked the fact that Beach pretty much has every style, which is fun. But the idea that the architecture connects to the public realm. And there are certain types of architecture that does that better, when we're doing more walkable communities where the houses are coming closer to walk paths and rural streets and lanes. But things like front porches, or basically your public rooms in your house are fronting on the front of the house, and your private rooms, like your bedrooms, are on the back. It's hard to do here if your views are out the back, right? But there's all sorts of ways you can do that, side by side, and we've come up with 1,000 different ways of doing it. So the design of the houses and the buildings is like, there's a certain kind of thing that a certain kind of knack to that. And so when we come in, like we have like a architectural review, and that's either, it can be like, in this case, it can be like a town committee. Y'all love committees, it's good. And then, but you actually say, well, let's look at the plan and make sure the plan orientation is going to make the best, the best community and best neighbors. That's the kind of stuff. The ones that, as in the suburbia, a lot of times, the garage is on the front of the house, and and usually there may be bedrooms on the front of the house and all activities in the back. So when people come home from work, they pull in their garage and they go right in the kitchen, and they never see their neighbors. Oh, I've lived here for 40 years. I just don't know the name of my neighbor. I mean, that kind of stuff. It's basically, it's not conducive to just say, when you get home, you wave, hey, how are you? Or, on the porch next door. Now, some people are introverted, and they say, well, I want to be left alone anyway. That's why I'm up here. Just get away from it all. That's fine. But there are other people that, may enjoy living here if there's more of a kind of this activity and connectiveness that walkable neighborhoods are really conducive to. So that's one thing. The second thing is that you kind of sometimes places get in a rut in terms of what they build and what they develop. And there's a combination of things. There's there basically are, in terms of homes, there are builders and there are realtors, and sometimes they're house designers. A lot of times it's basically a stock plan from somewhere. I think I've noticed the Stephen Fuller plan. I mean, I remember, I know these architects, sell plans out of coastal living and southern living, and they're good. They're well thought out, and once they sell one, like Habersham has the town architect there has sold the same house like over 3,000 times. I mean, it's just unbelievable, and it's a great, and it's a wonderful house, and it's great for walkable neighborhoods. But a lot of times everybody will say, okay, this is the price point, the sweet spot of the price point in this community, and that's what we're going to build. So everybody just takes off, and the realtors sell that price point. The builders, build that price point. They plan plans that meet that price point, and basically everything turns out to be very much the same. It becomes very cookie cutter. I mean, the architecture may vary and the layout, but basically it's the same size. Same size house. Is that the case here at all? Is there a lot of variety? What do y'all think?
There is a lot of variety, but I think people are focusing just certain areas.
Yeah. You're the builder, right?
Yes,
You're a
it's
builder.
sweet spot,
Yeah. And so you say, look, what kind of houses you build? Well, I build houses between 3,000 and 5,000 square feet or something like, that's kind of, what we do. you're building cottages. I haven't built one of those in a while, but somebody wanted one, or somebody, wanted a little accessory dwelling. I did one of those as a favor, that kind of stuff. But it's not something you do, So a lot of the new urbanist builders and realtors and architects have to understand that to create a holistic place, you need a full range of housing choice. And what that does is attract certain segments, population segments and demographics. Young people, larger families, single people that are working in the community, young couples, starter housing, move up, executive, downsizing, all that kind of stuff. And in a lot of places, like Charlotte, they build two things. They build a big house and they build an entire block of multifamily apartments. Those are the two things they do. And then some of the national builders have come in and started doing 3-story townhouses with rooftop decks, because when all the mortgage rates went up and the prices got expensive, they convinced the housing market that people could live side by side. And that was the only way they could actually get the price point they wanted. And there are folks like Ryan Homes, these are big national builders that do that. Now they're not gonna come up here, which is actually a good thing. Because then you start getting cookie cutter stuff. But at the same time, you want to actually introduce things that actually create the diversity, and attract young people, old people, families, et cetera, for a lot of year-round stuff. And we've had a really hard time in a lot of markets, convincing. Like for example, the realtors get into this thing. Okay, this is the price point that sells. This is what I'm going to focus on, and then when we come in and say, okay, we're going to plan this wonderful walkable neighborhood, and this is what happened in Cheshire and Black Mountain, the realtors would come in from Keller Williams, and I can't remember that, Allen Tate, or whatever the other ones are, and they say, this is what we sell, and this is what we want to sell, and you want us to try to sell cottages, and you want us to try to sell townhouses, and 2-family houses, but we don't do that, we don't know how to do that, and you're like, well, okay, and so what ultimately happens is that the development group decides they're going to do they're going to basically do their sales in-house, because they want to have a realtor that understands a full spectrum of this housing choice, or secondly, they find a realtor that gets it, just gets it. Oh, I get it. I grew up in this great little town, and we had a little apartment house down the block and a duplex across the street, and we had the big house with a big family down there and all that kind of stuff, and it was just like, oh yeah, and so what it's called is basically what you're not selling. And this is the other thing, a lot of times you spend a lot of focusing people when you're selling them on the interior of the house, right? It used to be like, you have to have granite countertops. What's the thing now you have to have? So,
Bathrooms now.
Bathrooms? Okay. Like what? Like the Taj
The
Mahal?
tile and the marble in the bathrooms and all that stuff.
Okay, yeah. And then and you say, okay, and there's a lot of choice. I have 3 choices of tile. It's not you have a choice in terms of the house design. It's 3, and that's what you do. You sell choice that way, right? And everybody, oh yeah, we have lots of choice up here. I can do this kind of siding, that kind of siding. So anyway, it's that kind of thing. And then, so what you're trying to do is to really kind of broaden the spectrum so that you actually achieve the kind of, the holistic type of community. So it takes a while to kind of figure that out. And also the builders have to kind of figure out, okay, I'm going to do like, we don't, a lot of times people in larger developments will say, okay, I'm a builder, I'm going to take this whole area over here and build, all my houses, and then there's another builder over here that does these houses, and we're saying, well, what we'd really like to do is actually, you 3 builders take 3 lots right next to each other to create a little bit more of an authentic personality and variety, because they all have, their own little things that make them more interesting. You don't really have that problem up here because everything's different. But that's the kind of stuff that does happen. And the builders don't like that, because all of a sudden all their trades are parking on the street, and and they're in their way, and that kind of stuff. So so there are a lot of things like that you have to kind of work through. and so this kind of goes on, but ultimately what happens is when you start selling, this is the way you do it. You know, when, let's say, so a lot of y'all people have moved around. A lot of people were live somewhere else and then moved up here, or back the other way, or they have homes in other places. Sometimes you would say, you'd go into a place, man, I love Beaufort, South Carolina. You know, so you go to the realtor and say, I know the housing market's tight. I know, you know, there's not much there. Just find me anything and I'll make it work, because I want to live in this neighborhood. You know, it's like, I want to live in Myers Park in Charlotte. Find me anything. And I'll renovate it. You know, I'll renovate it, I'll add on. I really wanted a 1-story, but it's a 2-story, so I'll blow out the back, put in a master suite. You know, great. It'd be a fun project, okay? So what you're doing is you're not selling the house, you're selling the neighborhood. So you sell the neighborhood first, and then you find in the housing second. And so the thing to do is really, and I think Beach does that. You sell Beech Mountain first, and then people come in, then they start looking for houses, right? I'm gonna keep going just because can you wait till, I've got about maybe 15 more minutes? Okay. Because I know when you start talking, we may be 15 minutes. Okay, all right. So, and I may answer some of your questions too. So the idea, and so you know how to do that. So what we're talking about, if you do a walkable town center, you have to convince people that they want to live or work or hang out in the walkable town center first, and then we figure out what we need to put in it, and that's what we're working on. Now, so in a culture where there's a kind of a limited spectrum of what's been built, so you know, built up to this date or the current trend, that's actually a lot harder than you think, because all you're doing is building houses between 3,000 and 5,000 square feet, trying to say, well, we're going to try a lot more variety. That's a really hard thing to kind of transition into. Also, the realtors say, you know, we've never sold a townhouse in Beech Mountain, ever. So there's no market. There's no market for townhouses. Well, we know that. There's no market for this. There's no market for that, because no one's ever tried it. Or the trend is you just have to kind of stick with what you know. So you really have to kind of dial it up and introduce a lot of things. And all of our master plans go through, especially all the kind of like Cheshire was that way, and also Haversham down the coast, and these are kind of like kind of semi-resort places. So so we have to really kind of spend a lot of time with the team just to kind of work through all that and how are we going to do this and what's the best way. So in order to do that, you need a variety, and that's just more than just the big house and maybe, you know, rental apartments and that kind of thing. How do you get that? Well, it's been really hard, and over the years, the new urbanists, you know, is what we call ourselves. We said, well, we've got to figure out a system and a method to actually convince people this makes sense. And so there's an architect out in Berkeley, California, named Dan Perlick, and his wife. Brilliant, and they were going through the same thing, doing a lot of stuff out in the west coast area, and they came up with a term called the missing middle. And the missing middle is everything between that single family house and the big apartment, multiplex stuff. And this is what, basically he came up with this little diagram. And this diagram is kind of interesting because it says traditional towns, like all the historic places around here, a lot of them already have historically had this missing middle because over all the time that they molted, with their community and kept it stable, everyone had all this housing choice. We just forgot how to do it. I mean, literally forgot how to do. Two families side by side, little stacked fourplexes. They're great little, like all over Charlotte and Elizabeth neighborhood and some in Myers Park, all over Dilworth. They're these small little 4-pack apartment houses that are on the same, that fit on the same lot size as a large home. And it's the same massing too. You've seen them, 2 balconies up, 2 balconies down. We call them 4-packs. Has a center hall, stairway. I lived in one in 4th Ward in Charlotte, which is their best historic neighborhood, for 4 years. One of my favorite places because I was out. It was a great neighborhood. And if you do a 3-story, it's called a 6-pack, 4-packs and 6-packs. And then there are other ones that, you know, like you can do little clusters of smaller cottages, cottage courts out in California, they're called bungalow courts. There's another architect who said, we're missing how to do that. An architect named Ross Chapin, also on the West Coast, and he came up with a book, some of y'all might actually have, it's called Pocket Neighborhoods. Anybody heard of pocket neighborhoods before? You have heard of pocket neighborhoods? Pocket neighborhoods are small cottages around the common green. There's one in Cheshire you can go see. It's a double pocket, steps down the hill, and there are a total of, I think there are like 6 houses on each of the little greens. I've already shown pictures and I will. And then there are attached housing with townhouses side by side, which y'all know what that is. And then also you can get into maybe like in a small apartment building. And I think there may be some kind of, like the one we're staying in, that's kind of a small apartment building. Stacked triplexes, like a lot of places around the country, like in Detroit and Cleveland, the Chicago area, they're called triple deckers. Anybody from Chicago? You know what I'm talking about. It's basically 3 flats, stacked up on a single family lot with big porches. And so it may not, well, that one may not work here, that kind of stuff. You have to kind of figure that out. And then also live works, where basically the historic, like a lot of the historic main streets, always had 2nd and 3rd stories, and that was where some of the affordable housing was located. Or the shop proprietors lived above with their family and had a shop below. So basically what they did, they had one mortgage, and they basically ran their business and their house, their home out of that. I think Fred, actually, someone told me he raised his kids above the store. Is that right? Okay, so he's like, yeah, the live work. You're like, you are so far ahead of everybody.
Out of necessity, financially.
Yeah, right. It's like one,
Got rid of a house and build a store.
You don't have to have a commercial lease. It's all right there. Yeah, brilliant. See, he's brilliant. He's brilliant at everything. So a lot of times we say, if we're going to do a town center, we have to seed it with certain things like, little live works, because those small little shops are the ones that people actually love. Like the Destination restaurant in Haversham was started by I think he was a flight attendant for American Airlines and retired and bought a live work and started a boutique cafe called Cafe 101. Incredible small plates like tapas, and basically people were driving from all over the whole low country. Everybody from Hilton Head was just coming across the Broad River, and a lot of people actually relocated there simply because they had a little hangout on Main Street. And they were so tired of being on that 5-acre lot with a beautiful deck that went out into the marsh. But it was just kind of lonely and isolated, and they had to drive everywhere to do anything. So this missing middle, we had to come up with how to do that. So a lot of architects came up with, we said we have to come up with great floor plans that fit each one of these, and the realtors have to test them to make sure that people are market ready. And the builders have to figure out if they can, build them all. Gosh, that's a smaller square footage, but we still have to put in all the same number of kitchens and bathrooms and all that stuff, right? So how do you do that? Well, it's just something you work through and you figure it out. And then what that does is basically opens the spectrum up in terms of some of the things we can say. There's nothing to do up here. Well, we don't have the right kind of people year round. Well, that's what you need to kind of figure out. And in terms of a historic graph, this is one of your graphs up here. This is basically the amount of missing middle housing from like the 1920s through the 2013. And basically it shows that with the red line, that basically the share of total housing, it kind of peaked in the 1970s, but basically it's really tapered off. So it's not that uncommon. It's just that, and so that basically means there's a scarcity of it, and so that means there's more of a market share for anybody that's willing to do it. Follow me so far? Okay. I have just 2 more slides. So just to show you examples of some of this, and these, I looked at these at 4 in the morning today when I started thinking about this. And I said, you know, this architecture is, people at beach, and they got been up here enough, say, doesn't look like beach. But I just want to kind of show it to you and say, well, imagine what it might look like if it's in beach, but you know, just in terms of, you know, the scale of it. This is a 6-pack apartment house next to a duplex. This is in the village center of Carlton Landing, the village of Carlton Landing. It's a new town in Oklahoma on a lake. These are 18-foot wide, 2-story cottages in Haversham. I think there are 3 bedrooms. There's a master down. You can see what's so interesting about this is that we actually, Haversham was a live oak forest. It was basically fallow farm fields, plantations that the oak trees had grown up. And so we just, instead of like, you know, clearing out an area, we actually wove the whole neighborhood through the trees. And you can see here where the trees, you know, basically every other lot was, and we said, well, what's the, you know, the pro forma was, we said, well, we can plat out, you know, so many lots, but one out of every 3 is gonna be a tree save. You know, because we knew we were gonna leave space for it. And that was a really wonderful thing to do because your canopy is mature from the very beginning that way. So this is a wider cottage. You can see it's shallow and wide, and that works great here when you're running along these ridge contours. Because, you know, you don't want to have to drop off. You said the most expensive thing now is how tall the foundation has to be. So a wide, shallow foundation is much better probably in a lot of cases up here based on, you know, the slope. The cottage courts, this is one from Carlton Landing. You know, it has a fire pit in the center with about 8 cottages around it. This is a muse court. Basically, it's a pedestrian court, pedestrian walk with smaller cottages on it. And what you do, it's a block long, and in this case, and which probably would work up here because in resort properties where people are there mostly on vacation, you'll park your car at the end of the block on each side, and then once you carry your groceries in, you cart them in. You know, you have to go 2 or 3 houses down. And basically you're there for the duration and you don't ever use your car again. So basically, once you're there, then it's, you know, it's nice to just have a walk from because the kids just race up and down, you know, this is their play world. And then this is the cottage court that's in Cheshire. This is one side of the oval green right here. And you can see the architecture is beautiful. If you like arts and crafts, the whole community is kind of based on, I would say, like Biltmore Village and some of the great camps, Adirondacks. Townhouses. This is very Savannah style because this is down in Beaufort. We've looked at all the Savannah row houses. And then also the 6-packs. These are 6-packs that are in Haversham. And then in Greensboro, we did an infill project in downtown Greensboro called Southside, right off of Elm Street. And they built a bunch of live-work townhouses. This is Bowman Development Group out of Huntersville. And these are great. These are art galleries, and there's a hair salon in one. And, you know, anybody that has a business that you'd like to have a nice kind of a professional walk-in, these are really, really nice. And here's some live works from Haversham. I think that one of these is one of the cafes. So, y'all follow me here? Does this make sense? Okay. Great. Now, so missing middle, you know, is a full spectrum, and you can do that throughout your entire neighborhood. Usually what we call is like when you do a walkable neighborhood, it's more dense at the core, it's less dense on the edges, and we feather out the density. We don't have to, like, you know, we just immediately jump from large houses to, you know, live works or, you know, townhouses. It's usually like large houses, medium-sized houses, smaller homes, cottages, duplexes, townhouses, live works, you know, shop fronts. And that's within a 5-minute walk. You know, it's called the transect, from urban to rural transect within a 1/4-mile walk, which is what we have on our site. So you can see here, for example, this is when so what you can do when you're doing a town center is you select the more urban, more dense housing, because you have plenty of large houses on large lots. And you have some cottages and medium-sized single-family houses, but what you want to do is start introducing smaller cottages and then duplexes and small, you know, little apartment flats. And then also this could be this could be all residential, or this would make a good hotel or an inn. You see the scale of it? Is that scale okay for a hotel or an inn here? Is it too big, too small? You're not sure? Just right? Okay. But you see, sometimes you don't wanna like, you say, but we don't want this, right? Yeah, that's not missing middle. That's, you know, that's T, we call it, this transect zone is from T1, transect to 5 is the most dense. That's T5, that's downtown Charlotte. You're not T5, you're probably like T4, you know.
I'm trying to figure out how the missing middle plays into our community, because we don't have a T5.
No, I don't think you would, no, you wouldn't do T5 here. No. Yeah, you'd say, okay, you just lock that off, and you stop at T4. So this is called calibration. You dial it in a way that fits for your neighborhood.
These types of developments you've done in the past typically had a developer that was doing these homes on spec, I assume?
It, you know,
Had some control of
well,
what was going in?
Yes, quite
That's
common.
gonna be the challenge.
Okay, quite common, but we've done them every different way.
Yeah.
You know, it depends upon what works. Like you figure out what team you have to work with, who you can count on, and there are usually a few drivers in it that, you know, kind of get it, and then, you know, there's thousands of little decisions you have to make. They generally make good decisions, you know, along the way. And so you know, kind of, you know, the outcome is gonna turn out, you know, good enough.
With what we've got that was done back in the 60s, how do you feel about the planning of it? I mean, is it?
It is a classic, you know.
Is it
Yeah.
something that works?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's like really cool. I mean, that era, it's a classic from that era of planning. Just like in the 1920s, all the streetcar suburbs, like Myers Park and others, you know, and Dilworth all had the little streetcars that came out. Those are classics
There was a
from
lot
that
of
era.
control over what was being built.
Yeah.
It wasn't under the homeowner
Yeah.
association, and they were all chalets. That's what we've
Yeah,
got.
no, I think it's
regardless
like,
of-
you know, it's really cool, and I think people, you know, it's like, clearly, you know, there's a market for that, and probably the larger, you know, there's continue to be a very strong market, a large market segment of that. I'm sure you can substantiate that. But what you're doing, you say, okay, but if we want to diversify and include, we want to broaden our market reach, then let's offer people other choices. You see, and so people say, you know, I'd really like to live in Beach, but I just can't find a house that oh, well, wait a minute, meet these people over here and talk to their realtor or the developer, because I think they'll figure out something for you. And the reason why I say that is that the missing middle started about 15 years ago, and then all the new urbanist architects hit the ground running in terms of creating plans. So there are thousands of really good plans for missing middle now. And they're great examples that are built too. So you can go kick the tires. You can go to Cheshire and kick the tires if you want and see. You actually have, we have tree houses in Cheshire y'all would absolutely love. They are great for your 20% slope here. And you know what I'm talking about? It's like, actually it's a building type that the zoning, overlay zoning says if you're doing a treehouse type, your footprint can be no larger than 25 by 30 feet. And it's basically up to 3.5 to 4 stories. And then basically they have 15 models. And the way it works is that I'll show you some pictures, which I can pull that up. You have tree, yeah, you do. I know. It's on the way down here. You can see them. And what you do, you enter on a middle level with bedrooms downstairs, upstairs, and people. And the realtor said, no one's, you know, this is our market is for active adults, but they're retired and they're not going to go up and downstairs. And we're okay. Well, we need to attract young families too, and they would like it. Well, it turned out all the retirees bought them because he said, well, if we're moving to the mountains, we need, we're going to be going up and down hills anyway. That's part of our kind of culture. The other thing, guess what the other thing was that made the big difference? Birds. Birding. And all the ones in Cheshire, the top level, had these big Swiss Family Robinson balconies, that go out. And everybody's out there going, we want to be up in the trees, and see all the birds. And so that's who bought them. And they said, well, yeah, we'll go up and down 2 flights, 1 flight, 2 flights, that kind of stuff. So,
Beech Mountain, I believe, starting off with chalets first, as our first construction availability, and that's what you had to build. Then in the 70s, because I know because we brought in the tree houses.
oh, okay.
Okay, we started building the tree houses out of the 2 round houses that are up by, Brick Oven. That's
Oh,
where
yeah,
our offices.
what are they called? They're called, what, round?
Round houses. Round houses.
R-O-U-N-D, or spelled differently, isn't it?
Debbie's office is one.
Yes.
I just wanted to turn, no, don't turn it off. I'm keep going, I'm gonna look for something while you're talking.
Okay, the round houses is what we came in with, and ordinances were passed that we could build them because originally we were not allowed to.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh.
According to ordinances, it was a chalet that you had to build. And we brought in the tree houses.
Huh.
And some people started coming in and wanting log homes. We weren't allowed to build log homes. Then they started, the town started allowing log homes to be built.
Huh.
Okay?
Yeah.
Then came the transition of the manufactured home that was brought on to site with 2 separate.
Modular, not manufactured.
What was
Pardon
that?
me?
Modular, not
Modular,
manufactured.
okay. Modular homes were then allowed.
Is that, so what are that, is that like the Pinnacle, is that a modular?
Yes, that is.
Part of
Part of it.
Same with
Pinnacle.
Fantastic.
Part of
Fantastic, you're
our-
staying
Yeah,
is modular.
Or you're staying.
Okay. Oh, those are
They
modular.
were just stacked, yeah.
And so it's kind of,
How do you do, so here's a question, how do you do better without windows?
Not legally.
David, how's your bedroom?
On my underground bedroom,
Yeah, right.
it's nice and dark. Nice time.
We can't call it that.
Okay. Well, anyway,
Yeah, they have
so there's some,
some-
yeah, there's advantages and disadvantages to modulars, I think.
but then we have also, I believe, as Beech Mountain goes, we developed the hotels that are up on top where more commercialization was done. And then there was a sector off that is nothing but condominiums mixed in with housing also.
Okay.
Okay, that are near the resort and off of the resort. And then off into the development of Beech Mountain, we have the individual homes. Okay, so there has been a transition of design, I believe, up here on this mountain that has served Beech Mountain for its different age sectors.
Okay, yeah, so you've actually, you've improvised and updated and so forth.
So just go down Charter Hills and you've got the 2 sets of condos there.
Right.
And houses all around it, roundhouses and chalets and. log homes.
Skiway and Wedling Way. And then you have the houses and you have the condos.
Great. Well, yeah, so, and the thing is this, people say, well, there's not a market for this, you know, it's just, we're so limited. I say, yes. But if you do a little bit of each of the little missing middle, there are probably like, 6 buyers out there. Not 300, but there are 6. So what you end up being is a niche developer. You say, okay, I know I can find it, I'm only gonna build 4 of them, but it's gonna be really cool. Or to activate our little town square, we're gonna build one side with just maybe 8 live works. Not a big market for it, but boy, it's gonna make that space active. It's not gonna be like Banner Elk, where basically the backyard, the parking lot for that walkable courtyard, is basically facing their public room.
Because then we're gonna have.
You know, that's just a huge, that's, not having an active edge on a green is like really important. Anyway, these are just examples of, these are the tree houses. They're kind of like what you're all do here. It's not that different, but they're sitting on these slopes. And these are actually, these are called treehouse cabins. They're smaller. These are 1 bedroom. And there's a little cabin cluster. I think I might even have some of these around here. But, you can see the shingles, the bark shingles. We also, the infrastructure, we do these washover bridges, so to keep a low profile, but, and also, it's not a pipe underneath. The water runs underneath, and then this flooded really bad. during Helene. But, you know, it's like, so basically the water was just over probably about, 8 feet, and so, and you know, it's just kind of the,
This is Beech Mountain right there, all of that.
all of that, yeah.
Looks like us. Is that a garbage bin? No.
Yeah, but here's some of the other, I was trying to find out.
Not there.
Is there stuff like this here? Like this? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so anyway, so we had a lot of fun doing these. And people so some of the other developers that we worked, like the folks in the Philippines, big development family in the Philippines, flew over to Cheshire just to see the tree houses. Because there's just such a scarcity of that kind of fun stuff, you know. So anyway, that's kind of what the missing middle's about. So I think that when you're thinking about this, you'll probably hear realtors say there's no market for this or no market for that. So, but there's always a niche. There's always a niche market, and then once the niche market establishes itself, then you can do the rear view mirror of market research. You know, the realtors do. You say we're going to do the market research, and I said, what's that? Well, the last thing that sold, right? Well, do you know if there's a market for that? No, because no one's ever done it. But see, no one's ever tried it. You know, they just say, you know, what sold, what in the past has sold is what the market is. So the NERB is saying, here's what we do. Like, you know, we talk about, we talk in the commercial meeting, we'll talk about, you know, what are the kind of retail uses that might work here. It has to do with, well, you know, and you may, I say, well, we tried that. You know, so anyway.
One thing in your thinking, and Michael can address this better, we do have ridge laws here where we can only go so high. So if we're talking about a downtown center, we can't go 3-story.
You can't go 3 stories?
35 feet is your max height.
Okay.
From where I live.
And is that to the edge of the
Peak of the roof.
to the top of the roof?
Yeah, not the mean roof height, but
So
the ridge height.
The ridge height. So that basically means everything would have to be flat.
Correct.
Yeah. It's not aesthetically as pleasing as what
Right,
it's
and in the commercial overlay, flat roofs, are allowed. It's been a while since I had to look at that, but.
Not allowed.
Correct.
As I said,
There's a certain.
see how subtle rules do make things happen? So basically say, yes, you can do 35 feet, but you can't do flat roofs.
Right.
That's so you
Within
do a roof,
commercial, yeah.
so you're stuck with probably at best 2.5 stories.
Right, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you look out at the reason why we probably have that
Yeah,
picture with
yeah,
that big
you've
building
been
over on Sugar
cursed.
Mountain.
Yeah. You've been cursed.
They broke us down.
And you know, it's like, you know, every place is different because of something like that. You know, violent pushback, you know, fury, just saying, how dare them. And you still look at it, like we were riding around the other way, and there's you in one direction, you know, and then there's the view that direction, you're like, oh, no, and then you move the view this way, oh, yeah,
There are a lot of
that's
people that will look at houses,
nice.
there are a lot of people that will look at houses and go, well, I don't wanna look that way.
Yeah, that's like, you know, so you're just, it's full of like,
I
you
don't
know,
wanna see that.
it's full of like, you know, 90 degrees of views.
And
just like
grandfather's
that.
just a little bit that way.
Yeah. It was interesting, when you do visual preference surveying, you know, like you show people pictures, and you say, okay, here's 2 pictures of nature, and one has like a telephone pole with a wire running through it, and you tell people which one, and it's like, they'll pick that. It's just one little thing like that, that completely disrupts the, you know, the harmony.
But also nature too. I mean, if you go over to the, Sugar Top, the houses, I mean, the condos that are way up on top are with aeronautic glass because of the wind. Okay, so, I mean, you have to look at the nature of the topography.
Yeah.
And I live in a chalet that is off the ski slopes, and man, when we have 60-mile-per-hour winds, my chalet wall is like this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're gonna have to take those into consideration.
Yeah, well, we've worked a lot in hurricanes, other hurricanes,
But it's not even just it's not the hurricane. We had it just 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. We had just as high winds as we had during the hurricane.
Yeah.
We just didn't have as much water.
So,
Cyclone lost 8 trees.
yeah, and that's the other thing. Habersham has been beat up a few times. Fortunately, they kept the whole, now here's the interesting thing, they kept the whole live oak forest intact. So, not all of it, I would say probably 2/3. But basically, the trees, they're still growing together. So what you do is you have a tree canopy. And what happens is it buffers the wind. And sometimes the wind will dip down, and that's when you really get the trees that topple. But if you have a tree canopy, it's like a helmet. And in many cases, the wind, buffers the wind that way. Now, again, that's not perfect, especially if you're on the hillside, which is that way.
And
But
that's what
anyway,
we got. We got
but
a
it's
lot of
better, I'm just
trees.
saying,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of tree
Micro
canopy.
skirts.
Like, don't just plant a tree in the front yard and then for the, for 300 feet is nothing. Plant trees all the way around your house and in the backyard, front yard, and ultimately grow a tree
But
canopy.
it's a little
that
scary
way.
now, Red.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody likes trees anymore.
More people are cutting trees.
Yeah, especially pine trees, you have to plant them in groups.
Beech trees.
Beech trees
And they're
too.
dying.
So, a lot of the resorts that became famous, like Seaside, they've had a lot of, Gulf Coast hurricanes. And so Seaside's the oldest, and the next one we do is called Rosemary Beach, it's down the road a little bit. Rosemary Beach, that was my favorite, it's beautiful architecture. It's all kind of St. Augustine arts and crafts, English arts and crafts. And then those got hit by a few hurricanes and they got beat up. And then we planned the next one called Alice Beach, A-Y-L-S. Look that up. These are all really beautiful, beautiful places. And it was after a horrible hurricane. And so the architecture was designed to be hardened. And what they ended up doing is looking to Bermuda and the Bahamas, the way that actually the architecture there was designed out of block and concrete with stucco. And basically, all the buildings, all the houses in Alice Beach are theoretically going to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. The winds of it, and there are all sorts of things in their code, simply because that became a market. It was market driven.
Sure.
And that's the thing, if you're gonna market your future here after Helene, you have to introduce that type of construction integrity.
Well, Florida did the same thing
Yeah.
for years and years.
Yeah,
and
the
they're
hurricane.
back to it again
Yeah,
now.
I was in Miami when
Andrew.
hit, yeah. We lost every tree and we were living in Coral Gables,
Can I say something real quick?
Okay.
This gentleman keeps talking about this great place, and I've been watching it come out of the ground for 20 years.
You've been here?
Many times.
Really?
I've eaten at the restaurants that was there.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
it's,
So you know the good, the bad, and the ugly too.
well,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful place. I see this house here, there was another one. I grew up in a house like that in Greensboro with the front porch, the roof.
Yeah.
I slept right up in that bedroom over the roof. But I'm telling you, as much as anything, I've gone back with my wife to look at it many, many times, to watch it grow. The tree houses you're talking about, and now you can drive up behind them, and you go to the dead end there, and.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
mean,
That's
well,
that
anyhow,
street right there. Yeah.
It keeps mentioning it, but everybody in this room should take a trip to Black Mountain just to see that and dream a little bit
I agree.
about what Beech Mountain could be like. So when he keeps mentioning it, it's because we need to pay attention and look at it. And I don't think it's too late for Beech Mountain in some ways. But just real quick, the street behind the town hall, what is it, Brooks? Meadowview. Okay, some of us had an idea there before houses got built, that would be a street where we could have an uptown section. And it would be commercial, and it would have places, whether you lived up above it or whatever, it could be a street there. And then people said, well, I've got to build houses, it got zoned, single family there.
Crap.
Yeah. Well, Brooks was in on it, but, I mean, we used to talk about it, how neat it would be to have that. But go ahead, I'm shutting up.
So this is the area behind town hall.
You got the street right
Yeah,
behind it.
so guess what? Right at the end right at the end, I'm glad you brought this up. Right at the end of our meeting yesterday, Rick Hall, Rick's not here, I think Rick's out with his speed radar gun, seeing on the back of the car. Is Rick here? Did you bring your speed gun?
I didn't bring it.
Okay, we're gonna have to figure out how to, if I find the app on, and do it. Anyway, he kept looking at that and said exactly the same thing. We should think about how we can just get right to the edge of the slopes with, our town center. And so at 5:30 yesterday, our entire team was out there walking around, trying to figure out if there's a way to do that now. But you're right, they built single-family houses, like, 1 and 2 layers deep back behind there.
Well, like the lot where my gazebo is, that's a single family
Yeah.
house lot.
Yeah.
I can't use it for commercial or anything.
Okay, right.
So-
And also like we were looking at yours, like, well, we could we could even theoretically bring our Main Street. I wanna show you a picture here, actually, that you brought it up. That we could run it, like the Main Street could start at the top of the hill and we'd line it up with the peak, the pinnacle of the beach, and then run the Main Street down across and work that out. And so basically,
Just like you said yesterday, if you stand up at the Public Works Building and you look out, it's
Yeah.
an unbelievable
Yeah.
view. It's absolutely a great area. It's not, we don't have to be on the slopes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's impossible now because you'd have to buy up people's homes and you saw the prices. And then you have the slopes.
And when those people bought those pieces of property, they were highly valued, so they were sold at a higher
Yeah.
value than the rest.
Okay.
And they have their houses on the ski slopes. Ski in and ski out, very few
Okay,
of which we
right,
have.
okay.
Very true.
Okay, so, all right, so we're out there walking around trying to say, what if that's possible? And so there are a couple of ways to do it. Some would require removing structures, okay? Which is, that's difficult, And then some of them are actually just saying, if we just kind of made systems like where your really nice green is, across the trees, that grouping of trees, that's almost like a greenway that comes down through, that could go all the way down through and connect, even though then beyond that, below you is where the house is, but that pathway that goes out to the street. So we were just trying to figure all that stuff out, because what we're doing is saying, let's come up with some options. This is like probably a radical idea, this is the radical idea rather than the light touch idea. But we're gonna give you a full range, just let y'all talk about it. If you finally decide it's too radical, okay, we won't do that, or, collectively, or we'll come up with, we have other options that maybe are, more the low-hanging fruit. But we wanna dream, this is the point, this is the time to dream. And so, if you look at this, and then you look at this, do you know what this is? Anybody know where this is?
Park City.
It's on the
Aspen.
bottom.
It says
You got it.
Somebody reads. Okay, well, sorry, I should have left the name off. But anyway, it took you a few seconds. Anyway, so this is the thing, and like I Googled Aspen, and I said, it said, this is the place where you can ski into town. And I was like, oh, wow, I bet you people love that idea.
I bet Chief Putney would love that.
And so, I was like, look at this, there's a whole town, the town center. And you just like, and then you look at these other pictures of it. Look, the Main Street here. This is the Main Street of the town center. It comes right up to the lift, So, I have never been there, but for people that have, is it true? I mean, it's true.
You can't really ski into town.
It's true. No.
You can't really do it.
Well, you can't like ski right down Main Street.
And it's on
But,
peaks.
but why not? We'll just move the lift over and then you ski right down. Or you can start at the top of the hill on the other way and ski all the way over. But the idea that you can.
Like Telluride and have a gondola that takes you.
Well, yeah, for, how much is it per mile?
12.3. Tell me why they're about it, Donnie.
Yeah, $600 million for, was that
No way.
Tom, can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, just one more thing about this while I'm here, and then definitely, you can definitely, this is like, I was thinking, okay, you've got your sledding hill now, which is the second location of the sledding hill, put it back across the street, but you then extend it up. So there's a sledding hill down here, but there's also like a mini lift that takes you up to the road, the access road and the gate there. And then so with technology today, people can buy their lift tickets online. They can take their phone, when they get up to the gate, they scan it and they go down and they get their half-day lift, however they do it. But you could do it that way. And the question is, we haven't had anybody from the ski resort here at all, right? Okay. So of course, their main business is selling lift tickets. Okay, but they also want to, you know, have commercial development that, you know, they can make money off of. So they have a town center, you know, idea probably in mind for where they are, which we're gonna be down there in July. That's where we're working. So we'll probably focus a lot on that. And hopefully they'll come to those meetings, unless you can get them here to come tomorrow. But this idea is where they'd have to say, okay, what's in it for us? Well, if there are small hotels and, you know, X number of additional people here that are gonna basically buy lift tickets, why not? Why would you limit this number of people, right? So anyway, it's like, this is a Google Earth view of that. Unfortunately, the buildings aren't three-dimensional up here. But you can see there's this letting hill in the foreground. And then basically, this land is owned by the town, this land is in play. And basically, it's this whole area up to the slopes here, except for maybe one house, is basically, you know, all it would take to actually have a main street. Can you imagine the main street coming down the hill with your peak as a terminated vista? You know, like, wouldn't that be cool? Every tourist picture would be your main street going down with your peak in the background. You know, how cool would that be? And so, and that's what, like another one. Okay, this is Bath. Their main street terminates on the mountain peak. You know, it's a little bit higher. But, yeah. But see, you got a ski slope, so it makes it even more interesting. You know, than just this, the natural beauty. But anyway, that's the idea. And so what we do, we do orientation. We orient it based on the location. So this was the cool idea that came up yesterday, and you had already, of course, Fred had already thought of it. So, yeah, this is your idea.
What's that?
You had already thought of this idea. Yeah.
Back when?
Yeah, way back when. So
Brooks
anyway.
might get in on it too. That white-haired guy there.
Alright, so this is one idea, but not the idea. I just wanna make sure you understand that. One idea, one option. We're gonna have others, but anyway, we just wanna, and then we're gonna test them with everybody. And you don't have to like decide right away, it's gonna be 2 months of just thinking about this before we come back.
Hey, Tom. Tom,
You have questions too. Can she start first? Oh, Rick.
During part of the day yesterday, we kept hearing about, well, we got congestion. When ski season, we got real congestion. And I started thinking, if you should try as hard as you can to decouple the skiers from the cars. You shouldn't have a car for every 2 or 3 skiers. You should have a car for every 10 skiers. And then we started to think about access where somebody could leave a dwelling unit that they either live in or they rented for the weekend and walk to the ski slope and ski down. And they prepaid for all their skiing for the day. And we call it a beach access point. And in Florida, we have BEACH access. Everybody's fighting about, you know. But up here, we could change it to BEECH access. But if you get beach access from the side to the ski slopes and let them ski and then go back to wherever they're going, either back to a shuttle that takes them to a parking lot because they're only day trippers, or if they're staying in dwelling units here, that they could walk or take some kind of conveyance back to the house from the side of the ski slope. And that investigation up there at the top with the connection with the town center is a great way to get to the ski slope up high. You ski down, you lift up, you ski down, you lift up until you're, you know, worn out, and then you finish up your day by skiing back down to the beach access that you came in. Never touching a car on the road. Never adding a car to the business.
And if you're staying in some type of housing in the town center, up on the hill, on this side, it's kind of like in the foreground there. Why don't we make every other street a slope that's a green street or a ski slope street? So basically, people that are up here don't even have to get in their car. All they have to do, they actually could come here on, you know, on a shuttle or something like that without a car, live in the town center, and in the morning, they just put on their skis and they get on the green street or the ski street, they ski down over to the lift on the other side of the street and take the lift up to the middle and have access. So basically, you don't need a car to do anything. You can, everything, you don't need a car to do anything. You're just basically, you just use your skis everywhere.
Cause the cars are your
Yeah.
congestion problem.
Yeah.
And those of you that live here, you would have capacity to use those streets because there wouldn't be as many ski people on in cars on the street. So, quick idea yesterday.
So you have questions?
I apologize, I've been in and out with work. I love big ideas, I love big plans. In order to make anything come to fruition, we've really gotta address staff housing and affordable housing. We can't have people living off the mountain expected to come and work. When you look at the restaurants that have come and gone, they've come and gone because there's not staffing. The resort literally had to buy a hotel in order to try and staff. And I know we're gonna transition into marketing, because then we have to talk about feast and famine. Because what we're watching is the people who are able to work up here, they're only getting their income during the winter, then they have to go away, and do we get them back in the next winter? So, my biggest concern and what you'll hear the most out of me is housing for workforce.
I agree with her. I think our focus on housing should start with staff housing. Because the rest of it's already done. You know, our roads are built, our houses are there. You go try to take that house that's on the slope down, you'll have to get a lot. So, you know, being realistic.
So what are some ideas to do that?
Here, hire you.
There you go.
No, I have.
Well, we have ideas, we wanna hear if y'all have ideas.
I have, but we would've done it.
Okay, here's one.
Okay, give me that big map.
Okay.
The
Which
big
one?
map of Beech Mountain.
Okay, up there, okay,
Scoot up
yeah,
her
yeah,
house.
okay, hang on.
Yeah.
Even says they can all move in with me.
I have a house on that road.
I know you do.
And they won't give up that house.
Hang on,
And they will fight. But if you will enlarge in this map.
No,
the one
the
with
downtown
the
one.
ski back one.
Go back.
With the dog park and the slope.
You were just on it.
Oh, you mean this area?
Yeah.
I call that a map, I call that a bird's eye.
Okay, it's a bird's eye view, okay? Along here, we already have a walking path, right here. We have a walking path right up to the dog park and the Pinnacle Inn. Okay, we have that, all right? In between here, because people rent their skis from here, or they are parking over here, are already walking through this area and walking through this house, and this house to get to the ski slopes. Or they come up the street to the gate and go through the gate and go down. Now, and this I have to ask the city for, you have a parking lot that accesses the ski slopes.
Yeah, right behind.
Right behind. And that is actually, if you're coming down this way,
Right.
going through between here, is right here. And it accesses the ski slopes. And it's a walking trail. And this property behind the town hall is big enough and wide enough. And I'm sorry about parking, because it's used as a parking lot for the town hall. That could be a walkable path from this area that is being overstacked and congested by those skiers that can't find any car space down at the ski resort.
Now, with that thought process, where are we putting our emergency vehicles? Isn't that where the police department park their cars when they're in the office?
No, they're parking more outside, and maybe
There's a couple in there, but very rarely. is
very
that possible.
rarely is it full. And
But as we grow as a town, we're gonna have to grow our police department.
well,
Just throwing out devil's advocate.
okay, but then you
Okay, all right,
have
let me-
this
let-
area.
hang on, wait,
Okay, you have this
Okay,
area.
so wait, let's don't argue about it. With parking, you have to have parking, especially the senior staff. They want their parking right next to their office, and they deserve it.
And then you still have this space
So,
next to you.
but we can do that. We actually have an idea for more parking there. Okay.
I mean, town hall is just taken over where our sledding slope was. it's just a green right now. Wouldn't that parking for town hall be a step in that direction?
We can have a plan.
Okay, but what I'm saying, there is a walk space already.
Yeah, we found, like, there's walking here, there's kind of the idea of going on the lift, going up here. You know, we'll just look at everything. Also,
Already walking in those directions, and they're already walking through private property, to get to that ski
Tom, I have a question. Yes, I've been coming, we're getting ready to move up here. I've been coming up here since I was a teenager. And 50 years ago. And so the staff housing for ski resorts, now, you know, it used to be a hotel. So is that what you're thinking about in terms of staff housing, something along those lines, or on this?
Not
or
necessarily.
affordable, like little homes? that
Because
could be rented?
if you're running a business up here, are you wanting to get the kid who's in college or straight out of college, or are you wanting to get the family who's going to settle and be stable and be here and work for you more than 2 years? So you've gotta look at it as a business person, who you want operating your business, and you're gonna want that family who's settled. You're gonna want that small family unit. I can't afford to buy a house here.
I know.
Is that not the middle that you were talking about, exactly that?
I'm sorry, say that?
Is this not what, exactly what you were talking about, the middle?
Yeah, the missing middle, that's, yeah, and the idea is that, you have to figure out what size, units. Like, a lot of them might be studio apartments, there are a lot of single people that work, there might be couples, and there might be families. So do you do one or the other? You usually do all of that, but you have to design, you at least accommodate a lot of that. So the people that are in the, what's the old hotel, what was the hotels? Yeah, so now that's staff housing, are those just like basically single hotel?
Your hotel room,
It's a hotel room.
with a kitchenette.
They have.
They have 3 people per room.
Three
They have
people.
bathrooms.
Just 2 or 3.
So there's a suite, if you will.
So to her point, all of these things.
They have their own bedroom?
They have a, well, 3 people in 1 bedroom.
3 people in 1 bedroom?
Mostly it's two.
So these are young people.
Because these are day ones coming from Boise.
It's a moot point because that property is gonna be developed and that's going. Eventually, he's gonna close that out and not allow anybody else but his employees. Oh, no, that's not true. That property
That's a
is
big-
owned by the resort.
Yeah.
It rents to the club in the summertime for the club's H-2B visas. And they have J1s in the winter, so that it's kind of good for them. The club is looking at, the club, from the club side, is paying $90,000 a year for housing of apartments like these, so just hotel rooms. And take a $90,000 mortgage and you go, whoa, you could probably do a really nice building if we had the property, if we had the building, if we had
And I'll just add one last thing to that. I don't have answers to that question yet, but I just want to assure y'all that that's something that we're researching here. And there's 2 pieces to it. There's exactly what we're talking about here with that seasonal housing for those workers, and in this case, foreign workers that are coming here for a certain period of time. There's a seasonal housing for that, and there's the affordable housing too. Year-round folks that we want to live here. Those are 2 very distinct things. The market is a very strong animal, right? So one of the things I think we have to understand is we need to be able to give y'all some strategies on how you can manage that. Because if we just build housing and left it to the open market, well, it's gonna turn into short-term rental and, you know, all of that. So we are looking at that. We're looking at we're doing case studies for both seasonal housing and that more affordable housing for year-round residents in other communities, the resort communities like yourselves, all over the country. Don't have the answers yet, but I just want y'all to know we're looking at it. And then I think the key question with this plan is, can some of that be accommodated within our master plan area as well?
What about the water?
Your Airbnb report?
Pardon?
What was the date range on your Airbnb report?
It was, it was different stuff. Some of it was annual, some of it went back 5 years.
Yeah, that makes a big difference on those numbers.
No, those, the trends were 5 years. The specific numbers, now, okay, all data has a certain margin of error to it, okay? If you look at data and understand that it tells a story, it provides context, and not worry about, well, it said 3,013 units, there's really 4,000 units, or there's really 2,500 units. it doesn't really matter as much as what the story tells us. But that was based off of what goes annually, that number I just mentioned.
But what was the date rate of the end? Wasn't up to today, obviously, because it's represented today.
I mean, I pulled it.
Was this, okay, a month ago, 'cause that's what I was wondering.
So if I pulled it now, that number might be 3,050, I don't know. But yeah, you're right.
Because we'll have people see this report, and they're gonna be like, oh yeah, STR is so strong here, as someone who runs STRs.
But I mean, if you go on Airbnb right now,
If
there's
you
not
don't know what
3,000
you're
units that are there for that. So it is looking at units that have been active over the year. Not necessarily units that today, there are 3,000 units that you could rent for next weekend. It's not saying that at all, if that makes sense.
So what Vail did was they built a little cluster, a little village that had, I think, maybe 10 tiny homes, around 700 square foot.
Right.
Little small village.
Cottage court, yeah.
And had a little community center in the center.
Yeah.
And they're trying,
Pocket
they
neighborhood.
had, have you seen them?
Yeah, there's pocket neighborhoods. Y'all Google pocket neighborhoods and Ross Chapin's book will
It's a
come
really
up.
cool concept.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we did at our business, and we did this maybe 3 years ago, was we started employee housing. And it was, we saw what the need was.
Yeah.
We needed employees. And
Yeah.
we probably have 15 in employee housing, and it's a game changer.
Yeah. This is what you shouldn't do. And the thing that we were talking about like you have all the other property on the north end, the other end of the town. And you say, well, we could we could build affordable housing apartment complexes down there. And I was like, well, yeah, you could, because those are big buildings and you need big parking and all that, if you're doing suburban models. But if you're doing a town center, you want young, attractive people, hanging out in the town center with all the other people, because that what makes it fun, right? You want all these people hanging out. We have, by the way, we have like 1 minute, we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna keep talking, at 11 o'clock today. So we need a 15-minute break. Go ahead, last question.
I wasn't here yesterday, but they talked about the water. So when you drive into Beech Mountain or on level 2, how are we gonna supply enough water and storage and electric to all this?
We recorded the discussion on infrastructure yesterday, and we had some very good information that talked in detail about how prepared the town is. And I would encourage you, if you missed that discussion, I would go back and just listen to that, because I think it'll answer all your questions. And if you have more questions, come back and we'll talk to you. All right, you want to take a break?
Right now, Reggie, right now. Well, because of the body things, like, the more we have and if you have another problem, like, Millie is accused of being and then I'm friends with Briggs, and then have another one, 17 months ago. What's wrong with your daughter? You know what, because I have another area, and they don't understand, but then again, I see Lori D'Alessandro, silly, the white green, English club, I know enough, right? I can't, come on, go on. But they aren't taking care of it, it's just gonna take.
Bill Village was
I like our world, you're not gonna change your life, you're not gonna change you get into a town center where you have to be friends right now, that's it. Wouldn't it be nice to be I'm not talking just that, I look at it as a way to make anchor. That's how I look at it. We did a town called
have a community celebration. It's a pocket. Yes, right. I love South Point. It's my favorite.